Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Thank you and welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series. I am Paul Vogelzang. Right now inside your body, cells are dividing. Each time they divide, they must copy an enormous instruction manual, your DNA. Most copies are remarkably accurate. Some acquire changes. We tend to think of DNA as fixed. You receive it from your parents, carry it through life, and perhaps pass part of it onto your children. But scientists are finding that inheritance is only the opening chapter. As we grow older, our cells collect mutations. Sunlight can leave its mark on skin cells. Tobacco smoke can alter cells in the lungs. Inflammation, infection, copying errors, environmental exposures, and simple chance can all play a part. Most of those changes may never matter. Some help our immune system recognize new threats, a good thing. A few give one population of cells an advantage over its neighbors, and some are associated with cancer, cardiovascular disease, or other health risks. That means that cells in your body do not all carry precisely the same genetic story. We've got a great story to tell you today. For those of us in our 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, this story raises a fascinating question. How much of our health is inherited? And how much continues to be written as we live? Our guest today is award-winning science journalist, Smithsonian Associate, Roxanne Khamsi. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Wired, The Economist, and other leading publications. Her new book is Beyond Inheritance, Our Ever-Changing, Mutating Cells, and a New Understanding of Health. Roxanne Khamsi, welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series here on radio and podcast. Smithsonian Associate Roxanne Khamsi, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to talk about DNA with you. I can't wait.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to this conversation, too, about DNA. We're going to talk about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. We're going to talk about Beyond Inheritance, Our Ever-Mutating Cells, and a New Understanding of Health, your new book. Congratulations on all this. This is really exciting stuff. Wonderful amount of research. You are a hard worker.
Thank you. Yes, I did spend 3 years reading thousands of research papers, but I really feel like this is something about our genetics that hasn't been discussed. So there was a lot of new material to talk about. So this has been a passion of mine for 20 years, writing about genetics. So it's always fun. It's always fun.
Yes. Well, again, congrats and thank you. We sure appreciate your time. I think on the heels of just that sentiment on your part of that things are changing, I think all of us were taught with respect to DNA that it's kind of this biological hand that we've all been dealt right at birth. And so what's missing from that explanation, my simplified sense of science?
I mean, Paul, this is what I was taught when I went to school.
Uh-huh.
You know, I graduated around the time that the human genome draft sequence was published with a lot of fanfare. And yeah, like I was basically raised to believe that the DNA in the cells of my toes were the same as the DNA in the cells of my fingertips and my brain. And what really has emerged, thanks to some new sequencing technologies, has been that our DNA is not identical in all our cells. There are differences that emerge from the get-go. You know, we're only a single cell for the first 24 hours of our life, and then the cells divide. You and me, we're about 37 trillion human cells, plus all the microbial cells in our gut. And each time those cells are dividing or replenishing themselves, there's chances for mistakes to enter, and even in the wear and tear that occurs when they're operating. So, if I asked you to copy, I mean, I wouldn't make you do this, but to copy by hand the text of my book, I wouldn't begrudge you if you had a couple mistakes in there because it's a kind of arduous task. So there's 3 trillion letters in the human genome, nucleotides, as scientists call them. And, when cells are copying their DNA to make 2 cells from 1 when they're replicating, sometimes these errors occur.
And you describe this kind of as an evolution that's going on inside the body, that cells change, they compete. Sometimes one population of cells begins to kind of take over. So what helps an altered cell thrive while its neighbors, another population, do not?
So this is an area that really got scientists interested in the 1970s. That's when they first observed in fruit flies that like certain cells can actually impinge on their neighbors and some can outcompete their neighbors. And then we started to see that this can happen in other animals and humans. And I think that what the theory is currently is that it really comes down often to energy production. So a cell that's a better user of energy can kind of replicate faster. Often it's a numbers game, really. And the cells that replicate faster just grow in larger numbers and kind of take up more space, if you will. So I think that the current thinking in terms of this Darwinian style evolution, right? So there are thinkers going back to the 1800s, one of whom I write extensively in my book, this guy, Wilhelm Roux, who have really just seen us as landscapes of natural selection. And so here, the advantage, the selection advantage, is the use of energy. And that's a theory that's going on. There's some evidence that it happens, in some cases, even in cancer.
I was really interested to read in your book and in my research of you and your work in anticipation of our interview today that that if a let me make sure I've got this right, Roxanne. So if a mutation makes a cell more fit,
Yes.
could that same advantage, that kind of that bigger, bolder self of cell, could that make me as a person less healthy?
Well, in the case of cancer, yes, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as I was trying to allude to, in cancer, oftentimes cells that are more, um, how do I put it? Like they will influence the microenvironment around them, sometimes negatively influencing the cells around them and giving themselves a growth advantage. There's all sorts of metabolic profiles of tumor cells that are different from the ones around them, which are sometimes even used to kind of assess how the cancer is growing. And so it absolutely is true is that an advantage of a cell is not necessarily an advantage to yourself, which is one of the really fascinating mind shifts that I want to kind of encourage in this book and this talk that I will give is to think of ourselves. It's kind of crazy because, as I said, we're 37 trillion cells, human cells, right? Walking around, working together in unison in some sense. But those cells are not always thinking of our best interests in mind. Sometimes they are. I mean, they don't really think. But I want to take this one step further even to say that although tumor cells as a whole might have some sort of advantage over the cells around them, there's even competition going on within a tumor itself. And why is this important? Because some of the cells that are resistant to drugs, so the ones that you can't really fight with chemotherapy necessarily very well, or some sort of other cancer drugs, that resistance sometimes seems to come with an energy use cost. So what happens is if you take away the drug that you're trying to treat with for a period of time, you can actually give an advantage to those non-resistant cells and they'll grow in numbers. And then you come back and you knock it out with the tumor treatment. So it can get complicated, but what you really just need to understand is that by understanding that tumor cells themselves are in competition and have some sort of disadvantages and advantages based on their environment and the drugs that they're exposed to, you can kind of tweak things to reduce tumor sizes and potentially even, cure cancer.
You do such a nice job in the book of explaining all this. It's just wonderful for a lay person in terms of science. I really found this fascinating, especially this idea of mutation, because when I certainly, kind of beyond inheritance, when I would hear the word mutation, I would think
Yes.
disease,
Right.
instantly. And
Honestly, me too.
yeah, yeah. And
Before
so
writing this book, I always thought of them as bad things.
bad things. And so how is it that we distinguish, kind of a good mutation from a bad mutation, and
Right.
what's all the cellular background noise going on that produces that?
I'm smiling because, I have a toddler, and we just
Yeah.
watched the Wizard of Oz for the first time. And, in The Wizard of Oz, you have a Gwendola, I think, or the I should know her name, the good witch,
Yeah.
and
Totally. Yeah.
Dorothy asks, "Are you a good witch or a bad witch?"
Mhm.
And I think we're kind of asking the same thing about mutations, and some of this, it's contextual. So what's good in some scenarios might not be so great in others. But, the bottom line is that, we're kind of just getting a grasp. There are definitely, like we're just talking about cancer, mutations that cause tumor cells to grow. But there's also mutations that happen that are necessary and good in our bodies for our immune cells to come up with new antibodies, which are the proteins that grab onto viruses and grab onto bacteria and neutralize them. So, one of the mind shifts that I had in writing this book is discovering how much mutation can be bad. It can cause a lot of disease, inherited diseases as well, metabolic diseases, neurological diseases. I mean, basically any kind of disease, there is a potential example of a genetic cause. But it's essential for immune function. We have to mutate for our immune function. It can also help your liver cells cope with calories better. And the other thing that's interesting to note is that there's some cases where people are born with a genetic disease, but they acquire a secondary mutation that actually corrects and cures them. So I call this like human autocorrection. And so going back to your essential question of, is mutation a good thing or a bad thing? I think the answer is it's both. And we kind of need to reclaim. I mean, the word mutation literally just means to change. And so change can be a good thing or a bad thing.
You talk about this process in the book. I want to make sure I pronounce this correctly. Clonal hematopoiesis?
Yes.
Hematopoiesis? Yeah.
Clonal hematopoiesis of indeterminate potential, but you can just say CHIP because that's the
Chip.
acronym that most
Okay,
people
good.
say.
Yes, chip. And so, again, with my lay, kind of background, that's in which, it takes place in which one altered blood forming cell produces a growing share of a person's blood cells. And so I want to ask you, is this something that becomes more common as we age? Is this related to kind of our aging process?
Yeah, so I go really deep into CHIP in the book because
Mhm.
this is actually why I decided to write the book.
Mhm.
In 2018, I was a editor at a research journal, and I'd been there for a dozen years. And I came across a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a really great journal. It's a really prestigious research journal. Not It was different from the one I was working at the time. And in this study, they found that these mutant blood cells that cause CHIP, that are related to clonal hematopoiesis of indeterminate potential, which just means that, like, we don't really know all the time what they're doing, um, that they are linked to an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. And for me, that was totally shocking because I had been raised to believe that mutations that were acquired could only cause cancer. So suddenly, my eyes were open to the fact that, okay, we can actually acquire mutations that cause these super common diseases that aren't cancer, this heart attack risk, and it's doubles these risks. So it's not a small thing. Uh, but to your question of, are they more common? Absolutely so. So CHIP is just one example, but just to take that example, in your 40s, you might have a few of these mutant cells, but by the time you are 70 years old, 1 in 10 to 1 in 5 people have a significant portion of these mutant blood cells. And it's linked to a lot of, like, we're learning more about what they can do. So it's not just heart attacks and stroke, but also it is leukemias, and there are potential other immune effects that these cells have. So I think it's really important to know that we start out, like I said, as a perfect single cell, just as our mother and father, or the sperm and eggs DNA that combined made us. And as time progresses, we kind of just amass mutations because once a cell mutates, it has that mutation for life, as do its daughter cells. What's so interesting also, because often people ask how much mutation is happening, is that when scientists looked at the white blood cells of people who are centenarians, so people who live to be 100 years old, they found that there's about 3,000 mutations in a given cell that you don't necessarily find in other parts of the body. So imagine how much mutation is happening. It doesn't always happen in parts of the genome that matter. But in the case of CHIP, for example, it can fall into these genes like TET2 that are known to kind of cause these perturbations, inflammation, heart disease. And so, I mean, I don't mean to scare people because not everybody with CHIP mutations will have heart disease or cancer, but it's a really interesting potential diagnostic.
Hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for that, and I appreciate you're interested in not scaring us because this is all very new science, and your
Yes.
reporting is just excellent. And so I thought to myself as I was kind of preparing that some of what we're learning about altered cells is moving faster than our even our ability to kind of know about them. We don't even know quite what to do with them and what to do about them. And I wonder if that kind of information is helpful as a warning, just as you say,
Mhm.
or is it perhaps frightening, and should we kind of stand back and ignore it and not be willing to take a clear next step?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliments on the book. I will say that, like, I've had scientists say that the material there is really new to them, so even experts are kind of my friend said it looks like a party invitation, but I really do think it's kind of like drawing together
It
people
does.
in this field or different
Yes.
fields that haven't necessarily talked to one another to build this big idea of how acquired mutations matter. But also, I've had friends that are painters and not in the sciences also say that it's kind of changed their understanding of mutation. To go back to your question of whether DNA changes, whether we should pay close attention to them or just kind of ignore them till we know more. I think it depends on your situation. I spoke with a lot of patients and families for this book. And part of the reason I wrote it was that when we get sick, we often want to know why. And there's not always an answer for us, or there hasn't been in the past. Partly because we haven't paid so much attention and we haven't had the sequencing technologies until the last decade to see, oh my God, you actually had this sickness because a mutation occurred. So, for example, there was a family I spoke with whose daughter was born in 2013, and it was a cesarean section, and they whisked her away even before the parents had a chance to hold her, and she immediately had a heart attack. And they suspected something was wrong with her heart in utero, but this kind of confirmed it. But when they looked at her mom and dad, they didn't have the disorder that they thought this baby had inherited. So it was kind of a mystery. Like, how could a baby have this long QT syndrome, which is associated with kind of irregular heart waves and these events, these cardiac events. But now what they've been able to do is they sequence cells of this child, and they found that she actually had spontaneously acquired the mutation. And this changed the whole understanding of cardiovascular inherited disease. They found other examples like it. And so today, what we can do is we can have answers to genetic conditions that in the past we would never have even thought because it wasn't in the family tree.
Hmm.
Does that help kind of clarify the
Yeah.
potential of this new thinking?
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
We're speaking with award-winning science journalist, Smithsonian Associate Roxanne Khamsi, author of Beyond Inheritance, Our Ever-Mutating Cells, and a New Understanding of Health. We began today with a conversation, really a fact many of us were never taught. The cells in one body do not remain genetically identical. They collect changes throughout life. Some changes disappear with the cell that carries them. Some spread. Most may never trouble us. Others can influence cancer, cardiovascular risk, or the way our immune system works. After the break, we'll turn the story around. Can mutation also protect us? Can scientists learn from the body's rare genetic corrections? And where does legitimate aging research end and the longevity sales pitch begin? You'll hear that too, because that is absolutely upon us these days. This is the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series. I'm Paul Vogelsang. We'll be right back with science journalist Roxanne Khamsi. Our guest today, of course, is Smithsonian Associate Roxanne Khamsi, written the wonderful new book, Beyond Inheritance, Our Ever-Mutating Cells and a New Understanding of Health. Just perfect for our audience. And I want to make sure that our audience knows that you can find out more via our show notes today. We'll have links to Roxanne's work, to where you can find the book, and of course, where you can find Roxanne's information about her upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. Roxanne, I want to talk to you about this idea of kind of the cancer cells themselves, because a tumor, you write, a tumor can really contain several genetically different populations of cancer cells. And the way we currently
Absolutely.
treat it, treatment kills some, the resistant cells end up surviving. And so I wonder, is this new way of thinking about kind of treating cancer as kind of this evolving population of cells rather than kind of one fixed target that we want to just kind of really hone in on and eradicate?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is another journey I
Mhm.
went on through the process where, again, I was taught there's a few mutations that might precipitate cancer, but there's some scientists now that refer to even like a big bang of mutations that happens early in a cancer development that kind of seeds mutations in, for example, colon cancer. So you're dealing with thousands potentially of mutations within a certain tumor. And to what you're talking about in my book, I open with the story of scientists in Florida who have developed this whole different radical thinking based on Charles Darwin's approach to evolution, or theory of evolution, where they say we want to give a competitive advantage to these cells that are drug sensitive. So we're going to take away these therapies that a patient needs until the cancer population's cells grow in a certain way that we come back in and we knock it down and we get the drug resistant cells to reduce in population size. So it's all these equations that they have. They use predator prey research from decades ago to kind of do the modeling. And what's really interesting is they've tried it in patients with prostate cancer and seen a survival benefit. So the idea is that if we pay closer attention to the diversity in cancer of the cells, that we can be smarter about how we time the treatment in order to kind of shape the evolutionary trajectory of a tumor in a way that can shrink it, perhaps even
Mhm.
eradicate it. So it's a really different way of thinking about
Yeah,
cancer.
it all is. And again, it's fascinating. And so, in many ways, one of the great surprises in the book is how this genetic, these changes, these mutations can really protect us sometimes. And so I thought that's a kind of an interesting tack to take. And so I wonder if you give us perhaps maybe a really, kind of your best example of mutation
Well,
taking place.
let me ask you this, Paul. Let me ask you this. Did you get a COVID
Yeah,
vaccine?
I, I'm ongoing.
Yes. Okay. The story hasn't
Yeah.
ended. So I'm guessing you got boosters then, right?
Ah, yes.
And so maybe people listening or people watching have also had this. I did as well.
Yep.
Now, let me ask you maybe a more personal question. Did you ever get COVID itself?
I did. Yeah, we did
Yes.
as a family, as a house, yeah.
So did
Mhm.
I, me as
Mhm.
well. And so the fact is that every time your body encounters a pathogen, its immune cells actually rearrange their DNA. It's recombination. It's built into our body's systems to reshuffle. And why do they do this? They do this because they want to make new kinds of antibodies. And all those antibodies are coded in their DNA. If they don't change their DNA, they can't come up with new antibody shapes that can kind of match, like a lock and a key, the antibody that they're trying to grab. Now, when you get sick, that mutation process happens. Your immune cells make antibodies. But what I found so interesting is that in New York during the pandemic, scientists looked at the blood of people who were getting these booster shots, and they were finding that actually the vaccines kind of precipitate a faster, more clever mutation in the immune cells to get to the good antibodies faster, and even to make antibodies for strains that haven't been seen yet. So this kind of validates why vaccines are helpful. I know it's scary to talk about vaccines in the context of DNA mutation, but the fact is that A, you're mutating your DNA anyway, and that more so when you're getting sick just from exposure to pathogens. So I think that's one of the most eye-opening things is that we need our immune cells to mutate in order to make new antibodies. And in fact, there's a bunch of different inherited disorders where people lack the ability to have immune cells that rearrange their DNA just naturally. And And so that's like hyper IgM syndrome. And these are folks that have to live in a bubble until they get like a bone marrow transplant to reset their immune systems to be able to mutate. So it's kind of dangerous to not have mutation to help your immune system. Does that make sense the way I described it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very helpful. And 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 that leads me to this question about because I want to talk to you about the phrase longevity, because
Right.
that's an industry unto itself. And we've talked a little bit about this idea of mutations accumulating kind of with age, but it doesn't necessarily prove that they're, the master of aging, for us. So I wonder if you could talk for just a second about what scientists really do have confidence in terms of kind of this discussion around this idea of longevity and what's the longevity industry saying about all of this at this
Yeah,
point?
surprisingly, this is a question that's not new. The question of
Uh,
how much genetics, gene mutation, and aging have in common, or what their relationship is. So, back in the days of the Manhattan Project, a couple of the most famous scientists working on that, after that was, a few years out from the end of World War II, they kind of kept thinking about mutation. I mean, obviously, for various reasons, the impact of radiation and nuclear war was the devastation of that was at the forefront of many people's minds, and they started to wonder: is there a relationship between mutation, and aging? So there's a line from that seed of thinking to during the pandemic when these scientists in the UK were getting boxes of animal guts from around the world. So imagine like a little pencil eraser amount of intestine. And they were looking at crypts in the intestine of all sorts of animals, zebras, giraffes, dogs, cats, mice, humans. I mean, I call it like a Noah's Ark, right? And they looked at the intestine because if you look at the intestine, there's kind of little islands of cells where you can kind of measure mutation faster. And what did they find? They found that basically across the animal kingdom, everybody at the end of their natural lifespan, so if they live a good long life, ends up with about 32,000 mutations in a cell, which is really interesting because if you don't remember what I was saying about a centenarian has about 3,000 mutations in a white blood cell. So they're finding this. So, a mouse, if it lives until 3 years, there's going to be 3,200 mutations in their intestinal cells. And then, a bowhead whale probably has that many when they're living to 200 plus years. So the idea is that something about the mutational rate kind of has an influence on longevity. And I think that's really interesting because we're also seeing that centenarians, the people who live longer, seem to have better DNA repair mechanism happening. So, as do these bowhead whales that live a long time. So, I wouldn't say it's 100% concrete, but I'd say it's really interesting that across animals and across different mechanisms, it does seem that mutation seems to accelerate aging. And there's evidence as well because there's some people with Werner syndrome, which is a disease where you kind of have rampant DNA mutation. Your body doesn't really know how to correct for mutation. And these folks will get cataracts in their 20s or 30s. They often, unfortunately, live only until about their early 50s and have wrinkles. So it's another avenue of evidence suggesting that how fast we mutate does influence how long we live.
and so the question really then is, whether we can reduce some of these harmful mutations, and if that's the case, are there some really evidence-based things that we need to look for and seek out, or are there just some kind of quackery going on around
Yeah,
this
so you
subject?
probably visually saw me like take a deep long breath
Yeah,
when you said that because as
yeah,
enthusiastic
yeah.
as I
Here we
am
go.
about like showing these different avenues, showing and in the book describing all this vast decades of research linking mutation, DNA change, and aging, I will say that now we're treading into dangerous territory, so to speak. Tricky
Yeah,
territory
yeah,
because,
yeah.
like you've been alluding to,
Tricky.
the anti-aging business is huge. No, everybody kind of wants to find that
Yeah.
fountain of youth, which I actually write about the fountain. I've dug into the fountain of youth story in my book itself. And I will say that there is evidence that animals like bowhead whales that live to above 200 years, they have abundance of DNA repair enzymes. So the idea is, should we just give DNA repair enzymes to people? There's companies based in different places in the US, these startups exploring like CRISPR gene editing technologies that can kind of come in and correct DNA mistakes that have happened. So the idea is, can we slow the mutational process? But what I've cautioned in my book, and I think people should think about, is that, and I only talked about the immune system here, but there's different examples where mutation is important for us to survive. So my question is, if you're stopping mutation in your body, does that not leave you more vulnerable to new infections? Because you need that engine of mutation in order to have a robust immune system to make good antibody shapes that you haven't made before. So I don't know. I personally wouldn't feel so great stopping mutation in my body right now. Would you?
Smithsonian Associate Roxanne Khamsi, author of the wonderful book Beyond Inheritance, our ever mutating cells and a new understanding of health. Roxanne will be at Smithsonian Associates. Please check out our show notes for more details and links and all of that great information. Roxanne, I will just say selfishly, I'd love to have you back too. I know as you're doing more work on this subject and others, you've just been a wonderful guest. We're so grateful for your generosity, but please think about coming back and sharing more with us. I know our audience will love it.
Thank you, Paul. It'll be about genetics, but if you'll have me back on that, I'd love to. Thank you. Take care.
Roxanne Khamsi, Smithsonian Associate, your book changes the familiar story of DNA. We inherit a genetic starting point, then life continues writing. Our cells divide, they accumulate changes, some disappear, some spread. A few contribute to disease, others help the immune system respond, or, in rare cases, soften the effect of an inherited disorder. For those of us later in life here on the Not Old Better show, that can sound unsettling, but it also corrects an old and limiting idea that our biological future was fully written at birth. Not so. This science may improve cancer treatment, sharpen our understanding of cardiovascular risk, and reveal new ways to treat genetic disease. Still, the limits matter. Finding a mutation does not mean illness is inevitable. It does not necessarily mean treatment is needed. And it certainly does not mean every new genetic test or biological age product is worth buying. That's the longevity discussion that we had. All this information helps when we understand what it means, what it does not mean, and what we can responsibly do with it. Our guest, of course, has been Smithsonian Associate Roxanne Khamsi, an award-winning science journalist. Her new book is Beyond Inheritance, Our Ever-Mutating Cells, and a New Understanding of Health. It's available now. We will have links that you can find in our show notes today for more information about Roxanne Khamsi and her upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. But we've had Roxanne Khamsi today. Roxanne, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Paul Vogelsang. This is the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series here on radio and podcast. We ask better questions, so let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Follow the evidence and keep learning at every age. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast.